Welcome to the Actionable ESG talk series brought to you by AKFI, the Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute. The world's first non-profit industry consortium committed to integrating ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation, and of course AI. Actionable ESG Talk series bring together great minds. Thank you, Eric, for joining us to discuss the current and future state of ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. I'm delighted to be here with you, Eric. And just allow me a quick view of your biography. You are currently the president of ISCEA International Standards Board, IISB. Have been a long-serving ISCEA leader, I think over 22 years. And you chair the Supply Chain Technology Committee, champions integrating AI and RFID, and IoT, of course, across supply chains through ISCA programs. You also have the title of editor-in-chief of the International Supply Chain Technology Journal. And in your background, I just want to mention your stellar academic career as Dean of Engineering and at the University of Nevada in Reno. So without further ado, we usually start the conversation with a broad trend question about sustainability, what trends and mega trends you observe in sustainability. And of course, everything is through the lens of the supply chain that you know so well.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And thank you for highlighting some parts of my career that hopefully brings me a good foundation. One thing I will talk about, when I was at the National Science Foundation, I was working with the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. And that is the largest graduate program funding in the country. And I got to see the best and the brightest and how graduate students really flock to the new areas of knowledge. I think one of the top areas of knowledge right now is sustainability in supply chains. When I worked at the State Department for the chief economist, one of the things that we really saw was that a big push, this was in 2021, the push for ESG compliance in environmental sustainability governance, where people were talking about green and net zero, and that the generation that's behind me and probably behind me and my kids, probably the same as my kids, are really taking this idea of sustainability as something that's important. And we saw that as we deal with supply chains across the world and different countries partnering, that even though maybe in the US we've focused mainly on geothermal and nuclear, other countries like the European Union are looking at the ESG components, and they're also wanting to make sure it's compliant as we do more and more global trade. So that makes me think that students should be thinking about three things, especially higher education, and also as we look at research and partnerships. I think they should be thinking about, one, how does ESG impact them, wholeheartedly, as students are learning about their specific area of the supply chain, manufacturing, logistics, transportation, electric vehicles, how that sustainability goes through all levels of the supply chain nodes and activities in manufacturing and service. And finally, we think about this big trend called artificial intelligence, from agentic AI to large language models to Gen AI to machine learning, how that this tool will integrate into not only the learning, but also making sure and ensuring some compliance of sustainability efforts. So I think those are things that I believe directions we're going in, and I believe that would be something to talk about in this conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And I I'm hard pressed to start unpacking the topics because they are so large and so interconnected as well. You mentioned AI, of course, sustainability, but you mentioned also the education part, especially we deal at AKFI with a number of students and interns which are generously working with us as volunteers. And we noticed definitely a generational, as you mentioned, a generational almost mandate to the older generations to mind sustainability, mind all these activities that you leave to us in the form of carbon footprint or environmental, let's call it nicely, issues. So absolutely, if we move on and a little bit more about ISCA and the standards and accreditation and governance, if you can share a little bit about the organization, you probably would like to start maybe with a little bit of the history of the organization and how the standards board developed and came about and what is doing about the future, not only about the past.
Thank you so much. International Supply Chain Education Alliance, which is called ICA, was an organization started approximately 26 years ago, 27. I mean, I have to look on the website, but there was a gap in really global gap in supply chain management knowledge. And what that means is that, though here in the United States, we had quite a strong supply chain foundational knowledge, globally, different countries, whether it's UAE, whether it's Iraq, Iran, Ukraine, different countries didn't have that type of knowledge. And when we talk about global trade, even though you can come to at the time you could come to the U.S. and get a good education, some of that knowledge was not available globally. And so ICA felt to meet that gap. Their traditional programs, the CSCM, supply chain manager, supply chain technology, were the foundational programs, but they grew into, as knowledge has grown, into programs such as the Lean Six Sigma for the manufacturing component, the certified lean manager, the technology provider. And again, how they grew is specific because at different parts of the supply chain is very, very big. You have the manufacturing, you have the transportation, trucking, trailer, you have so many things. You have inventory control. So again, as those areas became more and more specific, ICA provided content and knowledge. The standards board spun off from the ICA because ICA was such a strong content provider that it had a global standard. So the standards board sought to expand those high quality opportunities, those high quality content, and also started providing reviews of other content that was possibly meet the standard, whether it's a university that's global, country, whether it was a health organization, whether it was another training provider. Again, the standards board set that tone, set those evaluation metrics, made sure that the testing and evaluation components, the intern and co-op programs, the hackathons met this high standard that was initially set by ICA. And now we can talk about not only do we have the ICA content, but we have content that meets this high standard. We found that the standards board actually in partnership with our sustainability division under Ms. Madison De Silva, really was the first into market on sustainability certifications, global certifications, and took the leadership role in providing certifications worldwide back in 2020, 2021. And so we're very excited that we coined that term sustainable supply chains back in the 21, 22 when the world was shut down. We still felt the need that sustainability was a very important thing for the generation coming behind us. And so we're very proud of our sustainability program and also integrating sustainability into global supply chain training, certification, and actually understanding. And so we feel very proud about that, Manuel.
Uh, Thank you, Eric. And you made me think because I know a little bit about the world of standards. I contributed to telecom standards and IT standards throughout my career. But I think you setting up the first standard that it's coming from universities toward the supply chain, toward the, if you want, the user of the standards, right? So the supply chains are the users of the standards. But you coming from an education, learning from it, educating students and new grads, and then you build a standard because there is so much information that they need to learn about it. And then you come with this standard and you make it international. I would venture to say global, if I may. And this is a very unique way to develop a standard. Of course, standards are based on needs, but usually a company or a group of companies or an industry or sometimes a government comes and says, this is the standard. We need standards for everything. But
I'll
it's
tell you,
unique.
I tell you that what's exciting is that when I started participating with ICEA and the Standards Board, initially, in the U.S. we have a great education system, and so I would say our education regional accreditation boards, our ABET, and our engineering standards boards, even ASB, has been very strong in the United States, but that has not extended over globally. So certification training people see as it's more modern because clearly education, is focused on foundational knowledge and ahead what you get academically. And that's why internships and apprenticeships are so important. But where ICA tried to meet that gap was in that 2 to 3 years, 4 years after you've got that foundational knowledge that you have to be able to be productive in the workforce. And that's where I think they've thrived. Now we're starting to see partnerships with ICA and universities, ICA community colleges, training academies, because again, a training organization like ICA can actually provide content way faster than things can happen in what I would say traditional academic forums. And so that partnership is important, especially in sustainability, where things are moving so fast as we're looking at, different countries have different politics, but a standard is something that should be something that's agreed upon that can be utilized. We traditionally work with GS1 and GS1 US to make sure our training is aligned to global standards with things such as RFID technologies, barcode technologies, what we call EDI. A lot of things in the supply chain, if you're in industry, they have to work together. They can't be one off and theoretical. They have to be something that meets, from one partner to another partner. Partnerships don't work if we're not working on the same standards. And I think that's where, ICA as a content provider, then the standards board as a whole has really leveraged global trade standards as far as interoperability with ERP systems, interoperability with warehouse management, transportation. So these weeds, I call them weeds, don't get shown in traditional academia. They get shown again on the job or within an organization like an ICA. I think these weeds have become important with artificial intelligence and also with sustainability, because again, you have countries now that are concerned about these compliant activities. You see the World Health Bank has specific requirements for ESG designation. You see funds that have been called green funds that have been not green have been called out globally. So I think the idea of number one, we have access to information much faster, and compliance and making sure that training and understanding is, and especially in sustainability, is made known. And it also is something that can be interoperable between companies is where we really see the rubber meets the road. And I think that young, whether we're reskilling, whether you're new skilling, whether you're going to graduate education, whether you're a researcher, this has become more and more important. Clearly, people worried about jobs right now, right? But when you understand this interoperability, the integration of the sustainability requirements that are now global, understand the trading standards that companies expect you to be able to make things work through those standards like the GS1 standard, GS1 US, or any other interoperability supply chain standards. I think that you put yourself in a very strong position for stable job and stable employment.
Absolutely, Eric. I have a couple of things I want to bring forward. One of them, you're absolutely clear and right. We also notice in AKFI a missing standard for setting the fundamentals for AI. Because you say, okay, AI will come and solve everything. And then we ask, what is the data? Well, we have some data, they have some data, the others guys may not have data. How do you align this? It's one of our central activities. We call it this sustainability transaction standard. By the transaction, we mean transactions between people, not AI to AI talking, system to system. So thank you for mentioning that it's a problem that develops and continues to develop. The other thing you brought the real time in the work with GS1, right?
Yeah.
And real-time information you also mentioned now is required not so much by the governments and the regulatory agencies that look at sustainability or ESG, is demanded by the financial industry. Why is demanded by the financial industry? You mentioned green bonds. Well, you want a bond? Tell me your sustainability, and don't come with the story of last year or last 2 years and tell me this is the future. Tell me what you're doing now, here and now, in your plant or whatever you're applying for funding. And oh, you don't have it on file? Sorry, wait until you produce the data, and we'll allow you or not to have the bond, the loan, the
Well,
credit.
if you let me diatribe, when I was at State Department, which again is 4 years ago, we looked at blockchain, right, and ESG, and the
Mhm.
idea of the truth, right? How do we make sure that people are telling the truth when it comes to ESG? How do we make sure we measure the net carbon? How do we make sure we measure? Again, each country has its own measurement component. And so you go back to standard, right? When you look at ESG, blockchain was something that was, I think, educational knowledge of the blockchain is important. I mean, I know we're hearing people talk about crypto, but cryptocurrency is one thing, but crypto technologies and blockchain, I think, is something that people are missing. And I think that integrated with artificial intelligence, it could be used as a compliance tool. And so I bring those things up in that when you look at the world as converging, the AI, the crypto, the blockchain, and then also people wanting to make sure that the future is going to be safe and clean air and all these different things. If you let me diatribe a little bit, I'm on a venture capital group called Tompkins Ventures. And, that is really interesting as we see that this question of global trade and also these standards and also protection of information is the action behind the action. I know AI seems like it's the discussion, but it's the use of AI in getting information from databases. And again, you look at a blockchain database, and even now you hear the talk about MCP databases, which really is a middleware, But the idea of technology is changing to be really focused specifically upon one, getting information, and remember, I mentioned this in our manifest that 2025 and 2026 that you have to understand the data. If you don't really understand how the data is portrayed, how the data is collected, and how the data is modeled, AI can be destructive because it brings hallucinations. So again, really
Absolutely.
integrating the standardization of the data that you're trying to work with, understanding the application in a detailed way. And again, I push the idea of training and internships outside of traditional academic venues, and then also seeing how that's going to impact decisions or tracking compliance. I think that that is where the future lies.
No, absolutely, totally. And one thing about data actually, as you are, starting the conversation, uh, I would go and say the complexity of the supply chains keep growing and keep growing with international events, keep growing with technology. So the standards we have, they need to be constantly updated. And you brought the fact that it takes 4 years, 5 years for a student to get a degree, and then it takes 4 or 5 years to learn the ropes, right, of the job. And this is where certification come in as a quick way to learn, an accelerated way to learn, to match actually the physical processes that happen in the supply chain.
Mhm.
Because you cannot apply processes 5 years old, to the current supply chain.
Not now, not with AI moving
Disruptions.
fast. With AI moving so fast, you'd be surprised in 6 months, right?
we we working with an organization building data centers, for instance, from AKFI, and they said, "Well, do we need to care about the supply chain?" Is yes, you do, because you get electricity to the data center. Who is your supplier? How do you manage your supply chain?
Well, my team is, well, I can't disclose too much. We're working with a geothermal data center. And one of the discussions is, when do we do geothermal, right? And then because remember, geothermal is dirty, the mining and all those different things, and
Mhm.
actually shipping the batteries and the mini grid, what they call the mini grids, is very transportation heavy, right? And also,
Yes.
when you're working with communities, they see these large scale drilling rigs and all this stuff happening. And you're like, well, how are we tracking to make sure that this is going to be, again, clean air? We should talk off record because I'm on a two data center advisory boards right now, phase one funding. So we should talk, Manuel. But
Well, absolutely. No, and we'll continue to collaborate. Actually,
yeah.
I should have go in the full disclosure and mention also that I am an advisor to ISCA for the Americas. So,
Okay.
uh, for full disclosure, I'm a little bit of an insider, if I may say.
Well, I try my best to make sure that we highlight the history of ICA as the content provider of such high quality that they allowed me to spin a standards board off of it. But I also think that right now that standards board, we see the ICA opportunity and content, but we're seeing a lot of other content coming up. And to be frank, we have to make sure it meets the highest bar. And that's one of the things that I look at as things are happening so fast. Manuel, we have to make sure that as organizations want to be certified or accredited, that they're meeting that bar. Because again, you can AI changed last week, right? Everybody wanted to do a data model and call it machine learning, AI ML, but that
Mm.
really wasn't what AI ML was, right? And so really having a group of experts on the standards boards that really, like the founders of different AI companies, supply chain, CTOs, CEOs, really evaluate where we are with some of this information. I clearly think, even having world organizations look at our sustainability program, that was mind blowing, right? We really got to see, different organizations, even people from the World Health Organization and World Bank look at the ESG components of our sustainability program. So I really think that looking at from that lens, the future is bright. One is that what I think is exciting is reskilling, skilling. People can learn things very fast now. They can really, really learn information quickly.
It's 3 o'clock.
Application, though, generally requires some type of additional training, where I see the challenges, right? The applications and apprenticeships, internships, and even extensive, maybe 1 week, 2 week training that has to be supplemental to the foundational knowledge. So I think that's where the future is going. Yeah.
No, clearly, and it's almost, the metaphor of flying an airplane in the same time you build it, right? Uh, it is to that speed, right? You don't have the time to. And I see people changing careers not only as student or selecting careers as students, but changing it in the middle of the, mid-career changers, if you want. And I can see a lot of people moving toward supply chain, pushed by the economics of the supply chain, and also moving into sustainability in the same time. There is an interconnection. For instance, when you build a data center, right, and you use thermal energy, people are starting to be aware about the amount of impact on the sustainability, and they start to ask questions. We talk about stakeholders economy now, not only shareholders. The stakeholders are the community. The stakeholders are the employees of the company. If you have, new grads and young employees, they will ask you about sustainability because, as we mentioned before, there is a generational wave with sustainability. Gen Zers, especially, they come out of university. They ask, "What's your sustainability?" The finance industry, the insurance industry, is asking, "What's your sustainability?" As you mentioned, in real time. So the standards now have to catch up. They from a more narrow view. Okay, how you move physical goods from A to B, to how you tag them, right? RFID or other methods, how you track them, how you move them. Now it almost becomes not almost, but becomes a real-time process. I'll give you a simple example. With AI, you can connect the supply chain to the weather conditions, and now you can adjust the delivery date or the transport according to the weather conditions, modify it dynamically. Before that, you had a sort of more static view of the world. Now AI, as you mentioned, makes it here and now. Do it now and change it as you go. Change the path. Not to add all the other complexities which are coming from political layer, from economic layers in the sustainability. And you end up with probably the most complex and intertwined system that humans ever built.
Well, I agree. And I know our time is coming short. So, one of the things I would like to summarize and say that there are several emerging career archetypes that students are targeting that I think they should know about. One, the
Yes.
digital supply chain architect, the sustainable operations strategist, the resilience risk leader, the infrastructure and energy supply chain leader. The infrastructure and energy supply chain leader will have to know data centers, geothermal, nuclear, sun, wind, power. They have to understand how to get power back into the grid, and also critical materials and minerals, right, like lithium. And so I think that's the one that is really exciting, but I think that one's way more complex as we look at geothermal, lithium, ion batteries, all these different things. When I look at the sustainable operations strategists, that's ESG, supply networks, and compliance. So, those are the two I think we're really looking at. But I also think we're thinking about resilience and risk leader, the geopolitics, reshoring, and national security. That's going to be, those conversations are going to be tough. And then also, I think the one that we're specifically pushing on in the supply chain is the digital supply chain architect, the AI, the automation and systems. I do think that RFID and barcodes is the information truth, and that we're going to really have to get into real-time data transmission. All this static databases, I think, are just too short. I know obviously I love RFID, but clearly, even the image processing and the maxi code, when we talk about blockchain, all these things come into that digital supply chain architect. So in closing, I think that those are the jobs and the reskilling of the future. I really believe that, we've talked about this, but if I was really going to give some advice to young people today or reskilling, it would be in those archetypes, right? That, the digital supply chain architect, infrastructure and energy supply chain leader, the sustainable operations strategist, and the resilience risk leader. I really believe that in a way summarizes where I think things are going.
No, thank you very much, Eric. And I just want to invite you back for a continuation. And I think we left on the table a number of very interesting topics, including the technology and operations enablers and so on. I think we can dedicate a whole session only to that. I wanted to wrap up and thank you for taking the time to share with us the ISCEA progress in sustainability and, of course, in standardization. I want to thank the audience for joining us today, and I want to invite you back at the earliest convenience, Eric. Thank you again.
Thank you, Manuel.